So I didn't have money to go to college that I wanted to go to. Why? Because my uncle and my father, they have joint land together, and my uncle simply refused to share or even sell part of the land to fund our education. Well, guess what? We found out that was a lie. He already did sell the land, and you know what he did with the money? Since my childhood, my father and uncle got along very well. However, my uncle had recently divorced and was unemployed, so my father supported him a lot. In fact, until a certain age, my uncle and cousin lived with us. My uncle would go to the jobs my father found, work, and help me and my cousins with our studies. We were a cheerful family, and my uncle got married for the second time. After getting married, he distanced himself from us and started communicating with us less. He spent more time with his new wife and my cousin, and as my father and uncle's relationship strained, my father was saddened. But hey, at least during holidays, we would all meet at my grandfather's place, and there they would patch things up. During one holiday, my uncle was trying to convince my father of a business opportunity. While my father expressed concerns about the reliability of the job, my uncle insisted that my father would become rich if he made a payment. Unable to refuse my uncle, my father, thinking that maybe doing business together would improve their strained relationship, gave the money he saved to my uncle. Well, a few months later, my father faced a delay in salary payments at his workplace, and he needed the money. He called my uncle, asked for the money back. However, my uncle informed him that the business failed and he didn't have the money. My father was extremely stressed out and upset about it because, well, if we didn't have the money, we could not pay our rent and bills. Fortunately, my mother had some savings, so we somehow managed to solve our problem. My father, he was deeply disappointed and very upset with my uncle, what he's done. At the time, we were lucky that my mother had savings, so we managed to somehow get through the situation. My father became very angry with what my uncle had done, and he never spoke to him again. When I was in high school, my grandfather passed away. Considering that my father and uncle already had strained relations, my grandfather's death had a profound impact on my dad. They inherited a piece of land that my grandfather had not divided, making both my father and uncle the rightful owners. Although the inheritance should have been divided equally, my uncle suggested that waiting for the current low value of the land to increase before selling it and sharing the profits would be more lucrative. My father, finding reasonable, agreed to wait. Meanwhile, I was working hard to go abroad for my law degree. My father had always wanted to study law, but circumstances never allowed him to pursue the dream. Therefore, I aimed to fulfill it. My cousin also aspired to study abroad, and he mentioned that my uncle was making preparations for it. I assumed my uncle had found a good job, but when my cousin revealed that my father was also contributing, I informed my dad. However, my father was unaware of this, and when he confronted my uncle, a heated argument ensued. My uncle had used the money my father gave him to cover some of my cousin's expenses and claimed that my father willingly contributed. We never managed to get the money back, and this incident strained the relationship between my cousin and me. During this time, due to budget constraints, I decided to continue my law studies in my home country. 3 years later, with the increase in the land's value, my father decides to meet with my uncle again. However, he was confronted with a shocking truth. The land had been sold a few months earlier and someone else had started building on it. Learning about this betrayal filled my father with anger. We had not expected another betrayal from my uncle after his last mistake, and my father immediately went to confront my uncle. Still, my uncle insisted that he had spent the money on my cousin's education, leaving nothing behind. My father demanded both his rightful share and the portion allocated for my education, but my uncle just shrugged it off and slammed the door in our faces. My father was absolutely furious. Around that time, I'd started an internship at a major law firm. Well, among my colleagues was Toby. Toby was renowned as the best real estate lawyer, and Toby was also the older brother of a close friend from university, making his assistance crucial for me. I discussed my revenge plan with Toby, and knowing about our friendship, he expressed a willingness to help me no matter what, determined to use all available means to fight against my uncle's injustice. I prepared a strong legal case with the support of Toby. Wow. Throughout the court process, my uncle constantly threatened us, trying to stop my father or manipulate my emotions by threatening my cousin's education. However, I was determined to pursue justice and protect my father and our rights to the fullest. In the end, the court acknowledged both the moral and legal wrongdoings of my uncle. A decision was made for my uncle to repay all the money to my dad, since his actions constituted, both corruption and fraud. My uncle received a prison sentence of a few years. This decision not only put an end to the injustice of our family facing it, but also proved my legal abilities and determination in the courtroom, leading me to secure a permanent job at the firm through the court's intervention. However, the story didn't end there. My cousin, having to repay the money spent on studying abroad, returned to the country within a few months. The pain of not being able to continue his education, coupled with the imprisonment of our uncle, had such an impact on him that he lashed out at us upon his return. Believing it was a momentary burst of anger, we obtained a restraining order as he didn't know the full story, and we could not blame him for everything. Whether it was wrong to consider my cousin innocent or not, I'm not sure, but at least we were thinking with good intention. With the money that came in, my father assured me that he would continue supporting my education after university. Top comments from the original post. Comment from Kayla says, "It's expected that a family supports each other, especially your father, seeming to be that kind of person. However, I cannot believe that your uncle would deceive you and continuously harm you. I just hope this thing gets better for you from now on. By the way, I don't think your cousin's unaware. It doesn't seem very logical. He probably knows." Comment 2. Celebrating after your cousin finishes his education is quite awful. If your father truly cared about your uncle, he would have allowed your cousin to study. He seems to have expected a return for the help he provided, and when it was not reciprocated, he cut off communication. You have an incredible family, and after indulging in wrongdoing, you blame others for the consequences? Update number 1. It's unbelievable that people are blaming my father. My father opened his home to my uncle when he had nothing and supported him from my uncle to live a good life. If my father expected anything in return, he could have taken my uncle's money when he earned it. Instead, he supported my uncle. You guys are truly ignorant. I wish for my cousin to continue his education, but my family also needed money. I managed to finish my education despite the hardships. My cousin could do the same. When I warned my cousin in the past, my father and I were blamed, and now I'm supposed to defend his rights. Sacrificing myself to do good is foolishness, and I hope you're foolish enough since you're just talking so much. After my father could not recover from what my uncle did, especially during the court process and his constant threats, he developed dementia. This process took a toll on my dad, and he had to quit his job. We found a hobby for him. He's now planting in our backyard and started swimming in the mornings. My father's illness saddened me a lot because despite my efforts, there was nothing I could do to make him better. I intended to give him law lessons and support his dream, but it seemed like I would never be able to realize this. My news is not over yet. My career at the firm was going very well. I truly succeeded, and at the same time, I was trying to complete my academic education. During my hard times, my cousin with the money left by uncle became addicted to alcohol and gambling. Every day he caused trouble. One day my sister-in-law called me up, asking if I could talk to my cousin, and I agreed and went to the casino that she mentioned. My cousin, not heavily intoxicated, was playing poker at the table. I approached him, telling him we need to talk. He gets furious. He stands up and starts yelling at me, asking what I was doing here and how I found out. I explained that my sister-in-law had called me and that she was very upset. His anger escalated and he began physically attacking me. Hurling insults, security intervened, separated us, and threw me out after the incident, and I could not go home in that condition. So, I bought medicine from the pharmacy and stayed in a hotel for a few nights. On the day I returned home, my sister-in-law calls me up again. She asked if she could stay with us, and I became very concerned at that point. I went to pick her up, finding her crying on the floor at home with her eyes swollen. My cousin had started resorting to violence. After taking my sister-in-law and getting her checked by a doctor, I went to her house, packed her things, and moved her out. We provided her with a room in our home and tried to support her as much as we could as she gathered herself. Update number 2. Hey guys, so it's been a few months and well, my sister-in-law started to stay with us. For a whole month, there was no sign of my cousin. However, after that month, my cousin began showing up at our door, heavily intoxicated. He tried to take my sister-in-law away, and when I intervened, he attacked me. Again. This time we called the police, but he had already fled the scene. My sister-in-laws were visibly shaken, and I suggested just obtaining a restraining order so that my cousin could not approach her. I didn't want to be more lenient with my cousin anymore. His father had messed up, and now he has, well, continuing the same. I took a stick, removed my cousin from the casino, and took him to a street for a while. He was somewhat drunk and starts to scream at me, making fun of me, asking if I had not had enough of the beatings. Initially, my intention was to threaten him so he would not dare to come back home, but he provoked me so much that I ended up beating him severely. I beat him to the point that he begged me to stop. Crying, afterward, I left him there and returned home. When I got home, I could not calm down from the stress. I didn't know what to do. I was worried about what might happen to my cousin in the street. After putting my cousin in such a condition, I'm not sure if I have the right to even say this now, but a week passed since the incident and there was no news from my cousin. None. I started taking my sister-in-law to therapy, and in the mornings, she went on walks with my father and they decorated the garden, planted flowers, and this gave my father a friend outside of work since I was too busy. He felt neglected. My sister-in-law kept asking me about my cousins, but my only answer was, I don't know. She was right. After all, I had beaten her and, her son right there in the street, and I could not say whether he was okay or not. The woman was barely recovering, so I could not tell her anything, and when my mother and I were talking about my cousin in the kitchen, I recounted the incident between my cousin and me. My mother became very, very concerned and said that I need to talk to my sister-in-law, but it's too late. My sister-in-law overheard our conversation, packed her stuff, and left. I chased after her, but she took a taxi and went somewhere, and I didn't know where. Everything was starting to pile up, and I didn't know what to do. When I called my sister-in-law after returning home, she starts blaming me, asking what I've done to her son, and she blamed me, guys, for everything. Her son's current state, her husband's fault, and him being beaten. When we hung up, it was too late, and I was in a terrible state. If my sister-in-law's going to my cousin, he'll probably face violence again. Update number 3. Hey guys, it's me, I'm back. Well, I'm starting to go back to work and return to that normal life, but life at home was not returning to normal for me. My father was distant, my mother silent, and I tried talking to them, but my mom, not having seen how I behaved, was deeply saddened and frightened. Eventually, unable to bear it any longer, I began packing my stuff, feeling unwelcome. When my mother saw what I was doing, she stopped me, saying I could not leave. And I said, "Even if I stay, you're not talking to me anyways." My mother was in tears, pleading with me to explain everything, and I began with my first aunt calling me and went on to describe my cousin's situation. My mother insisted that I should bring my aunt back because we could not know what might happen to her. Expressing pity for my aunt and acknowledging that, although she did not approve of what I did to my cousin, some things could go wrong. After a long time, when I called my aunt again, my cousin answered the phone and starts cursing and shouting me. He called me crazy, all sorts of stuff, and said he was so worried about what he did to my aunt, and I called Toby again, telling him the whole story and emphasizing the urgent need for help. Toby, being considerate and cautious of the situation, said that he would help me. Together, we prepared a case against my cousin involving charges of violence and tax evasion, amongst others. Since he had no evidence of the day I allegedly beat him, he could not accuse me of anything. When Toby heard the details of what happened between my cousin and me, he didn't blame me, saying he would have done the same in my place, and just, talking to him relieved me. I had not talked and shared my problem with anyone for a long time. All I had left was to call the police and liberate my aunt from the clutches of that person, my cousin. So I call them up, the police, provide them with my aunt's address and phone number, and they caught my cousin and put him in custody, while my aunt was asked to wait somewhere. I immediately went to my aunt, and she was bruised from head to toe, but she was conscious. Unable to look me in the eyes, she was in pain. I spoke first, proposing to file a lawsuit against my cousin with me as her lawyer. I explained that if he went to jail, at least he would learn a lesson, and when he got out, they can reconcile. My aunt was angry, expressing her desire to give up her son, narrating how she could no longer endure this. After some contemplation, she firmly agreed to file the lawsuit. We initiated the legal proceedings, and I took my aunt back to my family, supporting her throughout the case. Update number 4, the trial. Throughout the trial, my cousin begged my aunt for forgiveness, promising to set everything right and quit gambling and drinking. He even knelt down at my aunt's feet, but she wanted revenge. She wanted him to pay the price of the beatings that she endured and hoped that her son would wise up. The court sentenced my cousin to 4 years in prison. The trial, which also gained a bit of public attention for being a domestic violence case in the area, concluded, and when my aunt faced the camera, she said, "I may not be his biological mother, but I played the role of a mother for years. He showed me violence, and today I'm proud to have won in court. I believe he'll learn his lesson while serving his sentence." So, we returned home. And my mother, having seen my aunt on the news, welcomed us with delicious meals and desserts. While my cousin started serving time in prison, he continued to call and send letters to my aunt, filled with threats, curses, and apologies, since my aunt was receiving psychological support. Her doctor advised against any contact with my cousin. Consequently, I called the prison revoking my cousin's phone privileges and intercepted all the letters before my aunt could read them. I knew she would be upset when she found out, but it was my little way of protecting her. I haven't told you about my uncle yet, have I? He was last incarcerated for involvement in fraudulent activities last year. He was released due to amnesty, but we were unaware because he had not informed anyone. Hiring a detective to find out what he's been up to, I intended to prevent him from freely continuing a life of crime if he returned to his old ways. My father's dementia was a result of the anger he harbored towards my uncle. According to the detective, when my uncle was released, he went to an unfamiliar city and started a small business. He was attempting to build a new life, but the real issue was whether he cared about my aunt or not. The poor woman was left alone, oblivious to her husband's release from prison. I got my uncle's number. I called him. Initially, he did not recognize me, but eventually he didn't want to talk, claiming he would live a decent life now and had no intention of returning. I explained to him his wife's situation and their son's actions. When he heard that his son was entering prison just as he was getting out, he couldn't believe it. He starts crying on the phone. He asked about his wife's current state, and I informed him that she was undergoing treatment and spending most of her time with my father. I asked if I could move my aunt closer to him, and after discussing it with my aunt, she agreed. I packed her belongings and took her to my uncle. When I was alone with my uncle, he apologized for everything, and when I asked him why he didn't contact his family, he said that he thought that they would be happier without him. I told him this was his last chance and returned home. Final update. After a long time, the house became peaceful and warm. Occasionally, my aunt and uncle would visit, joining us for family meals, and my aunt had recovered significantly. My uncle had returned to the person he was during my childhood, and it felt as if time had reversed, and I was reliving my childhood. Meanwhile, I published academic articles, and I even authored a book narrating these legal cases. My position in the overlapping firm rose, as I rarely lost the cases I handled. Toby and I became close friends, almost like brothers, always supporting one another. We would even jokingly compete over who had won more cases. I received offers from professorships from universities, and although I'm not entirely sure Yeah, I might also become a teacher. When my aunt visited, I could tell that she was doing so much better. I handed her all the letters from my cousins, initially upset. She later understood and appreciated my decisions. Reading those letters during those times would have caused her more harm, and my aunt was aware of that. My aunt and uncle were considering reaching out to my cousin as they believed he might have learned some lessons during this time in prison. However, I wasn't so certain about that. But I respect their decision. My father's illness shifted from dementia to Alzheimer's after his recovery attempts. I tried to support him in his healing, and I hired a caregiver to ensure both that, he and the house just received proper care. My mother and I found ourselves somewhat alone, but we were working hard to improve our family. So it looks like at the end of the day, the uncle has to repay that money. And I do want to know your thoughts about this family dynamic, because today's story was so insane. I mean, we had so many different levels of pettiness throughout it, but ultimately, the comment section were definitely siding with OP. So I do want to know your thoughts about this and how OP handled the case. I want to know everything you're thinking, so drop it down below in our comment section, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on today's video. And if you guys are new to the channel, my name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate these sort of stories every day. And you know what? If you just can't get enough videos, I have more than one channel. Go ahead, go to the description below, check out my favorite playlist, and check out the other channels as well. Thank you guys for joining me once again. I hope to see you tomorrow. Have a fantastic day, and do remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.